This evening we're going to have a speaker, Padraig Reilly. He's a founder and CEO of Boxcore. It's an Irish construction software company. Padraig is a structural engineer, a graduate of the DIT, and he spent many years in 15 years in civil engineering and project management, delivering major projects across Ireland, the UK, and Australia. This event is co-hosted by the Cork region and supported by the Electronic and Computer Division. I'd hand over to Padraig now.
As Mark was in, just a short background of myself, I'm a fan of a company called Boxcore. We're a company that focuses on building software for construction companies. So we got, prior to that, as Mark was saying, my background was very much in the construction project delivery side of things. And we kind of, over the last few years, our job we see at the moment is really kind of incorporating and looking at ways to apply technology to make life easier for people on a site level and construction projects. And obviously something that's coming to the front of the last couple of years certainly has been where can AI be applied to actually do something useful for people in construction. And there's a few we've had some experience here, so we'll give you a bit of some of our experience, I guess. And I guess to talk a little bit too about kind of a unique experience where I've come from the construction world, now dealing with software engineers, and kind of how both disciplines would deal with experimentation and especially new stuff like AI. So yeah, thanks very much. I'll just move to the next slide here. I get it. So I guess just in terms of, I've put this slide together in terms of where we're at currently in construction, without sounding doom and gloom, we're still very much under digitized. We're officially, I think, still the second least digitized industry. Still very manual processes abound in terms of how information's moved, emails, a lot of double handling of information, a lot of chasing people for pieces of paper. Still quite challenging. Data can be quite disjointed, like you've got multiple information in a lot of different areas. And productivity is still relatively flat. Like everyone, I think, seen that chart where you've got construction versus manufacturing in the last 40, 50 years, where construction is pretty flat. Manufacturing has gone up at a relatively sharp pace, and whereas construction is just plodded along. So hopefully, with a few challenges overcome, AI can be one of the things that can help trigger a bit of a kink in the curve and frankly get the productivity moving in the right direction. I think there's a lot of challenges, of course, in construction that other industries, other spaces don't necessarily have. So, you know, any project that everyone knows has multiple stakeholders from the design stage, especially through the delivery stage, where to get everybody on board with something new or different can be challenging because of the nature of amount of people, especially as you get into the project delivery stage. Also, I think a big issue is the nature of how projects are delivered, a project-based delivery model where people really just think on a project-by-project basis, whereas, you know, it's very hard to think longer term with that sort of model. And I'm largely talking from a contracting perspective in terms of delivery on site. And of course, the nature of the industry is quite risk averse, really, because there has to be kind of a zero tolerance for risk. You can't really screw up, frankly, if you're building a building, you know, without pretty substantial repercussions. I think other industries, I'll talk a little bit about the difference in how software engineers can experiment to have, you know, with pretty much complete abandon, so to speak. Construction, just the nature of the work, you can't really do that. I suppose the other challenge too is construction is still relatively low gross margins, so companies frankly don't have a lot of money to splash around to try new things. So all these sort of things kind of become challenges. However, if we solve for some of these, there's, you know, we know there's a growing labor problem in construction. There's not enough people to build the houses that need to be built. There's in construction, it's not going to get any better anytime soon, so it could certainly help that. Improve a productivity boom, of course. Free engineers up to do more higher level tasks. So I think this is kind of an area where technology, and particularly AI, can potentially help cut out a lot of the manual back and forth and the more mundane admin type tasks, and free engineers to do more the critical thinking, the more higher level tasks there. And yeah, good old Doc Brown and Marty there, which is now in the past actually, which is rather in the future, but that's it. So back in 2015. So yeah, that's a bit of an overview in terms of where we're at in construction, I guess, just a bit of a perspective. And again, talking through more of the challenges. of course, regulatory concerns. I guess an example here is like very much the technology already exists. It's out there, but adopting the technology faces regulatory issues. Like, and a lot of that, I think I use the example of the driverless cars. The technology is available for the last 10 years, but the barrier really is getting over the regulatory things. I think in construction, you'll have a lot of the same challenges. Certainly from a design perspective, from a delivery perspective, I'm particularly involved in a lot of the safety management side of things, where contractors have a legal responsibility to manage safety on site. If you let an algorithm manage it for you, there's challenges with that. So there's challenges with that. And I think sort of still getting over those regulatory concerns will be a challenge. Bigger issue I would suggest would be the disjointed number of companies involved typically in a normal project. You can have hundreds of companies in a really big project. How that information is moved around is a real challenge. A lot of the breakthrough in AI over the last few years has been around generative AI, which is really largely based around data, like running algorithms over data to derive patterns, insights, and hence simplify some tasks. So that can create somewhat of a challenge. And jumping to a team, I guess we certainly I came across in the industry was getting people to use technology on site who are busy, who are juggling multiple things, is a big challenge. Like getting people to actually use it can be a really, really big problem, and it shouldn't be ignored. That some of the challenges I'd say we face. So yeah, that's just talking about some of the challenges there. So I think in terms of where we can think AI can actually deliver value to people in construction, we need task-based tools. So if you think things from a first principles perspective, certain tasks, applying technology to simplify how they're done rather than necessarily a full platform solution. And a good example of this would be something like data entry, data processing. So people in construction still spend a lot of time scanning information, inputting information manually, emailing back and forth. A really good use case, and we've had quite a good experience with it, was applying OCR technology, which is automatically pull information off records, whether it's on images, photos, or PDFs, convert it into using natural language processing to save the actual work of having to manually type it. And that's a good use case. Not the use cases in AI in terms of replacing critical thinking, probably not so much. And I know certain companies and probably like clever than us and are trying it and they might well pull it off, but we see more the low-hanging fruit, the manual admin, the processing of the more mundane tasks, focusing on eliminating them as much as possible first, before we get into replacing the critical higher level thinking. And that's where we see kind of a good use case, so to speak. And I guess an important thing with this, which doesn't necessarily always happen in construction, is encouraging bottom-up experimentation rather than top-down planning. Because, and I'll talk a little bit about my experience certainly being in both the construction world and the software engineering world. Within the software engineering world, it's inherently people are continually experimenting. The nature of the industry is very much challenge everything, experiment, but you can do it quite easily. You can create a sandbox, for example, where you can have people who just test things out, see how to go. There's no real major consequences to screw up, frankly. It's a little bit more challenging in construction because of the pressures with schedules, with clients, and you just can't really screw up, frankly. So that creates a bit of an issue. But we'd say you can't change the fundamental high-value task of designing the building, of doing the work and checking the work. A lot of the administrative and bureaucratic processes, which are quite frankly one of the biggest burdens companies face, I think there's a lot of opportunity there to apply AI to tackle that. In terms of that's where we would certainly take a lot of our focus on, and we've had a lot of success in that, because there's also within the safety tech space we're in, there are some good applications like say Protex AI is another Irish company. They've built computer vision where essentially you put cameras up in a workplace. It'll detect patterns and use machine algorithms to essentially see if a guy's going to walk in front of a forklift or something like that, detect dangerous patterns. Now that's very challenging to apply in construction because every site's different, whereas in a factory, which stays the same for 10 years, you got a lot of that data which you can train it on. So that's a little bit challenging because, of course, every site, every day is unique. So getting that pattern recognition is a real issue. Another good application we've seen, another Irish company too, Evercam. They used cameras again, computer vision, where detecting things like even, you're using OCR to record number plates of drivers. So if there's an argument over when a delivery was 2 months ago, it's searchable. You type it in, you get it. You can know how many wagons of concrete were delivered, stuff like that, and it's done automatically. So these are the types of applications I think which are really good that kind of cut out a manual process that a lot of contractors in particular would have spent time either trying to administer or not administering at all, which can add a lot of value. And that just data capturing, data processing, really, I think already good applications shown to succeed in the market. So we'd also say targeting the right workflows. So again, as a general rule, kind of the higher level stuff, like, somebody's observing a crew doing a crane lift. You still want the experience of the competent person watching what they're doing, checking, applying that experience rather than the computer or an algorithm determining that. But where I think there's definitely the opportunity is more the mundane, administrative, bureaucratic data capturing and moving around as such. And that's kind of our general philosophy in terms of where we're going with that. There is a lot of hype, of course, with generative AI. One of the things which we looked at, which was, and as within the industry, some of our other companies out there are trying, is to build generative AI that can essentially predict when incidents are going to happen. So that's a big ask. It's a wonderful in theory, but I think we're a long way from that. Like this, you still need the humans to do that. In our opinion, it's not probably the right thing to focus on at the moment. We see if we can build tools that eliminate as much manual admin for the people actually doing the work, free the humans up to do the thinking. That's a better approach rather than trying to kind of replace the humans and in the first place, and replacing that experience, which of course is very important too. So I think getting back to that is kind of more, I suppose, from an engineering background myself too. You kind of always taught to try and take a first principles approach to any problem and any tasks that's out there. Can you break it down to its core elements? How can you do the task better or more efficiently using the tools that are available to you? We try and kind of apply that as much as possible. So rather than kind of starting with the technology and pushing it down to the users, look at what the user's trying to accomplish, then saying, okay, can we apply this piece of technology or this, integrate that into making the task more efficient? So that first principle approach I think is quite important. Right now everyone's pretty much got access to almost an infinite suite of generative AI tools. People can experiment, but I think it's good to take it as a task-based focus is a good starting point. If just something simple in terms of cutting out a mundane task that you normally do, and that's where we see quite a benefit as such, And so I guess jumping back into our experience, I think a few areas definitely been quite beneficial. The OCR technology, which we've incorporated into our solution, which auto extracts data when you take a photo of somebody's training record, saves you having to manually do the data entry. We apply natural language processing, so if someone literally just takes a photo within the app, it recognizes, pulls off the data to just confirm it. It's logged, so it's a simple thing, but it saves a lot of manual effort. We find facial recognition, which of course has been around for quite a while, but typically being problematic certainly in a construction environment because, not being reliable, bad lighting. We've incorporated machine learning to improve its performance basically, so that rather than when somebody walks up to one of these cameras, it's doing traditionally been a static search in terms of matching their face to authenticate them. Something like machine learning, as the person keeps going up to the camera and their face changes, they grow a beard or they shave their head, it's continually learning, it's evolving. So you get a better performance just essentially by running an algorithm, applying machine learning that essentially increases the reliability. So another task-based function that actually just helps to do a better job in a very simple way. Another area where we're spending a lot of focus now is agentic AI, which in practical terms means essentially building algorithms that can replicate workflows. And how you do it? Building algorithms that can essentially replicate workflows or eliminate human effort as much as possible. So this was quite a debate internally, and certainly with a lot of feedback from our customers, which is the right workflows to focus on. And this came into the conversation where, do we want to kind of somehow look at pattern recognition in terms of helping companies prevent incidents and what might happen in the future? Our focus is very much on not so much that, more on can we apply agentic AI to run routine checks? So you can essentially tell a customer if somebody hasn't got their minimum training, or if they're missing, they haven't done the weekly inspection, if there's a certain item that's flagging up. So you essentially almost like an assistant that the checking of information is a better area in our opinion to focus on, rather than necessarily, okay, we're going to prevent an incident from happening, the predictive stuff. So I still think we still think that AI is very much from an application perspective in the early stages of finding use cases. We would see the initial low-hanging fruit is focused on just cutting out, frankly, the administrative burden people would have, the bureaucratic burden. We're probably not clever enough to figure out how to prevent something happening in the future, and if we did, we'd be very happy. But we'll leave that to other people. But more, I think anyone involved in around the construction industry, there's too much paperwork, there's too much emails, there's too much admin. That's kind of a good place to focus a lot of energy. So that's where we're kind of applying it, but it's more, again, trying to take that first principle approach that as the customer brings up a problem, we go back to our engineers. Can we apply available technology to solve that problem, and using that kind of approach? So I guess just that's kind of from the construction side of things, from the client side of things. From an internal perspective, we've obviously got our engineering team, our software engineering team, and it's interesting, certainly coming from a construction management background, civil engineering background, to compare the approach from a civil structural construction management background to maybe a software engineer. So software engineers are just continually experimenting. It's just, it's kind of like they never stand still. And, we've the pace at which that changes is incredible. Like it's just baked in. They just don't stand still, which is great. So we find a lot of operational improvements in terms of like our coders, we got automated coding tools that help check, reduce the likelihood of bugs, for example, in the code, that assist make the software engineers focus again more on the higher end critical thinking, rather than necessarily the nuts and bolts, the more mundane tasks. And the pace at which that happens is quite scary. Like, so we would essentially now got tools where I'd say our engineering team are working probably a 50% higher productivity than we were 6 to 12 months ago, just by applying a few basic, tools to the workflows. Another thing we found very useful, which I'm sure you guys might have seen, is things like AI note takers, and just for the customer support thing, because as a business, we want our focus to be on focusing on critical problems, solving critical problems for our customers, and helping those customers apply that technology to their workflows, and less on the more, how should we say, mundane or bureaucratic tasks, and the focus more on the higher value tasks as much as possible. So we're always kind of looking for objects or tools that can help with that. And again, things like infrastructure automation tools, which we've had some good experience with from the back end perspective, to simplify a lot of the what were once time consuming tasks, and to allow our engineers to focus more on the higher value critical thinking that frees teams up to frankly do more higher value work, and not so much getting bogged down in the, I guess, the more mundane stuff, so to speak. So that's kind of a brief kind of an overview, and I've kept it pretty high level in terms of the experience, in terms of but I'd say that's kind of what we found, and the philosophy we try to keep to, which was keep things simple, very much build it from a first principle perspective, and look at these, applying these technologies with the view, well, okay, can this do something useful for our customer? Can it solve a problem? And we would say, having certainly spent a lot of time talking to customers, and certainly internally with our engineering team, and the feedback we've had with the product we got already, the customer really only cares about, is this product solving a problem for me? Now, is this making my life? They don't really care about the technology behind it, and really they shouldn't. It should be, good technology should be almost invisible. It should just do the task. You don't need to think about it. So we think keeping that focus and on that is certainly our strategy, and we plan on keeping on that. There is very exciting things happen, of course, within AI, and especially the generative AI side of things. But I would say the challenge, of course, incorporating that into workflows and construction has always been that data challenge, like that, getting the data, being able to control the data and have access to the data. So we would see that being an interesting how that evolves, but it's probably not so much our focus as such. Ours is, again, task specific, focusing on more the practical applications that actually solve a user problem on a day-to-day basis as such, rather than necessarily trying to predict the future, necessarily replace the need for that more human, higher level critical thinking element, so to speak. Very good. So yeah, that's just, again, just brief summary there. We, from our experience, again, just focusing on, I guess, solving the problems, of course, for customers is certainly been, I'd say, the number one thing. I'd say when people are looking at AI tools or looking at various options out in the market, trying to steering away from the jargon and looking, okay, from a first principles perspective, will this cut out some human effort for us? Will this provide some value? And keeping it simple, if a tool requires an IT director to use or an IT manager to use, it's probably the wrong tool. It should go, in our view, the goal of technology should be to remove, it should be built around the user, that you don't need to be an IT degree necessarily to use it. And of course, that coming back to keeping it nice and simple, and old Steve Jobs, where I think we got to start with the customer experience and work back towards technology, and not the other way around. So sometimes the technology, it's people have a new technology and try and push it downstream, whereas I think obviously Steve Jobs got it right. I think where you start off with the customer's experience and work back towards the technology, and is probably a good principle, we would say, to try and live by. So yeah, thanks, and looking forward to some questions. I know it was pretty. Thanks for that, guys. Yep.
Thanks, Padraig, for that presentation. It's very good.
Thanks.
Do you have any questions from the room?
Yeah, Padraig, thanks for that. It's great. With the sort of jobs that, sort of projects, without giving too much away, what are the way you have applied it on projects? Or
Yeah, so we work for a very broad range of companies. We're on a 75-story building in Manhattan, down to sheds in Longford, to data centers in Amsterdam. So we kind of we built our software in a very practical way. I'd say the biggest, when we initially launched the product, one of the key initial features was looking at just simplifying that data capturing problem. And the OCR, while it's a relatively simple thing, it's just that's been quite good. It just cuts out that manual effort. If you can imagine a building project, people show up, you've got to capture their training records, you've got to input this data, and usually it's a site foreman who's got 10 other things to do, who doesn't like using a computer. So automating that's really been good. It just cuts out a workflow, replaces again that site foreman who frankly doesn't want to be doing admin, just takes a photo, clicks a couple button, that's it. It does the work for them. Simple thing, that's been very good. We're looking at applying that to other aspects too, but we find that's probably one of the, certainly from my experience in construction management, has always been the pinch point. It's when remove as much admin from the site foreman, site supervisor as possible, because they're the person, frankly, who's under pressure doing 10 other things. They're typically the person who aren't necessarily wonderful at technology or applying or don't have the time. So we always try and think, can we make their life a bit easier as a goal? And that's been very good, and that's going to help drive a lot of our growth. Another area I'd say where the technology has worked quite well is the facial recognition, but more importantly, the machine learning behind it. First big project we did was actually Dublin Port, one of our biggest clients, and it was very much a tough environment. It was out on a marine project, poor lighting. And of course, traditionally, facial recognition has been problematic on a building site level because of the lighting, various reasons, bad weather, it gets, that, but the machine learning, frankly, has been brilliant. Like we get very minimal support issues. The client, it just works basically, which is what the customer wants. It just works. So that's been really, really good. Because I think from our perspective, technology works best if the user doesn't know it's there. It just cut out some tasks they used to do before. Now it just works a bit better, or they don't have to do that task. So that's kind of where, if the user knows they've got to go, oh, this is the technology. So the user only cares about how do I get what I need done with less effort and less headaches, because everyone's always busy trying to do other things. So if they've got to spend a lot of time worrying about or thinking about it, there's a problem.
Excellent.
Right, just a question myself. For the private software on site, you actually use apps on phones or tablets, or what do you actually use to implement other than just the cameras? I know cameras are probably hooked up to some kind of computer system or something, but what actual tools do you actually physically use on site?
Yeah, so
with the AI?
Yeah, so the user, it's essentially a web app which you can work on any device. So a phone, laptop, tablet, doesn't really, once you've got an internet connection, it can work off it. The facial recognition hardware, it's a technology partner we're working alongside, where it's physical facial recognition reader that connects in at the back end to our technology. So it integrates in the cloud as such. So essentially, we install these facial recognition monitors that would link in the cloud back into our device, and the user would essentially then just use the app on either their phone or their tablet or their device as such. With, again, as much as possible, fully cloud-based, so there's no local setup or hardware in terms of servers or anything like that. It's essentially just internet connection, you're good to go, and you're just cutting out again that steps in the chain, so to speak, and extra work people would have to do as such, Mark.
Yeah, there's a question online there. About the security of software and updating. Are there any fail safes should software need updating or crashing, and what form of checking information that the AI computes?
Yeah, so good question. So the AI will pull the information off. It's still up to the user to confirm it. And we do that because, of course, AI can still make mistakes. And we would apply it as it'll take a photo of, say someone's safe pass card, it'll pull the information off. The user still has to confirm it. It's probably got about a 95% success. If it's bad lighting or it was a dirty image or whatever, it might get it right. But there's an actual step where the user has to click a button to I confirm it, etc. So, and I have the ability to change it. So again, it's a point where, and that's, I guess, required legally too, that if you were audited, well, who's actually checked this training? We don't want to take that responsibility because we know technology isn't 100% perfect. So there's still that human element, but there's a lot less human effort, or not having to go and type it all in, etc. I think that's probably a good philosophy with how technology can be done. It's more that co-pilot type philosophy where it'll work alongside you, but you still need to do the final critical decision, like, in terms of, right, you got to confirm it. You're the site manager, you're the safety manager. You still need to be throwing your eye over it and checking it, so you can't just put your feet up and let the technology do everything. Well, probably not yet anyway. So,
Would that help you, most of the stuff about record keeping?
yeah,
Record keeping, has it moved towards maybe presenting documentation like missing statements, that you would take your guidance towards it, and I know the person has to confirm it at the end, but is it helping? Is there anything in that field?
yeah, it's not
Yeah.
something we've overly. I'd always think of something like a method statement as a planning tool that really should be collaborative with the people doing the work, and that's an area where you kind of still want the experience
sure.
of the people doing the work to get involved. If you get asked, ChatGPT will knock you up a meta statement, and people are probably doing this at the moment, saying this is the criteria. Now, to me, that's not really a great application of technology, because a meta statement or a RAMS should be something, frankly, where humans should be doing. If they're not, there's a problem, because that's where they're, and this is the bit I don't think technology necessarily should replace. From our perspective, we see the filing, the tracing, the tracking of version control, the issuing a document, the administrative process around the RAMs or the meta statements is where technology is best applied. We've built a system around that. We don't get into the content creation on it, because I personally be probably a bit old school that you still want that planning, collaborative approach between the stakeholders actually discussing how they're going to do the job, talking about it, and that. So, we kind of steered away from the content creation as much, and more into the looking at ways to cut out the administrative, bureaucratic flows, so to speak, if that makes sense.
Sorry,
go on, Jim.
No, I could just see it even from moving it to the design side or whatever. It's bureaucracy, the amount of SharePoints and all these things you're on, and there's messages coming from Patrick.
Yeah.
I think you set up one of these fellas like they have in Ryanair or other places. Hi, may I help you today? Jim can't be bothered dancing we met, but can I help you?
Absolutely.
Which
is quite interesting. One of the things I noticed when obviously with the software and things is how software engineers communicate and manage tasks is very different, and it's quite effective. Kanban boards, they do what they call a lot of async work. So they'll decide if a meeting is not necessary, productive software engineers just won't have it. They just think meetings they should be, but there's certain workflows built in and different ways of doing it. So it's quite interesting. And whereas you're right, sometimes even from project management side of things, that we're from the design stage through the whole stages of the life cycle of a project, it's all along where how information's moved around can be kind of a frustration, and sometimes can frankly detract value from the whole process. So that's but I'm not being disrespectful, but unfortunately the more stakeholders involved, the more again can make it a bit more challenging. So that is a challenge, and so there's not necessarily what we're focused on. I'm sure there's a good application of AI that can help all that. If someone figures that out, we're more in the safety, the workforce management side of things. If someone could figure out how to that, which I'm sure we're looking at, they'll do very well, I think.
Have you any experience of, I suppose, post-construction phase with regard to facility management or asset management?
Yeah, we do. So we have, if you think of our solution, it's essentially a very simple tool for managing training records of people, their equipment inspections and procedures, and tracking attendance. So, and that can apply kind of for a lot of applications. We're primarily focused on construction, because we know that's construction is a very dynamic environment where there's a very much need for its high risk work. But we have a lot of clients in the facility management too. Funny enough, we get some interesting queries. We actually had an event management company come to us recently who build stages for concerts, and if you think about it, it's like a mini construction project, and very scramble 100 people together, throw up a blooming rock concert stage, and it's got all the same risks, the same processes. People have to be trained. You got to check it. got issued an induction, is there a procedure that's been approved, how to sign on to it, have the equipment. So same with facility management. We have a lot of companies we deal with, especially in the mechanical, electrical side, who'd in the construction phase utilize, say, Boxcore to help manage their training and safety elements, but as they move into cruise into the maintenance side, it's the same issues. They still legally have to, manage these documents and try. So it's the same principle. So yeah, we from our perspective, we're kind of agnostic, but predominantly in the construction space because of the nature of the industry. It's where there's a lot of pain point, so to speak, and because of the consolidated nature of construction, where it's usually project based, where you got to scramble, for want of a better phrase, 20 companies, mobilize them, and you're still under the pressure of quite often you don't know who's going to be there, what contractor will be there next week, but whoever's there next week's got to have the right people, they've got to be trained, they've got to have the procedures in place, so it's very dynamic. So it has to be kind of flexible to suit for that. We know that's quite a pretty good area to focus on, I think.
Have you ever used the software to manage kind of like work permits? Like where you have like hot works permit for an area, or the scaffolding has to be inspected or something, and if it's not out of date, maybe to notify just this area can't be used because the scaffolding tag is out of date, or if this electrical system is locked out because it's the tag out, lock out kind of system. Have you ever used it in that kind of form?
Yeah, absolutely. We've done it on probably 500 projects to date on that. First project was actually Salesforce development in Dublin, permit system where when we were constructing that, to a lot of interior stuff, things like work at heights permits, hot works permits. So we've essentially built, our goal is kind of to bring everything that's legally required from a safety perspective into one place. So that instead of, if you're observing a crew, have they the right training, have they the right equipment inspections, have they the procedures, have they the right permits. So you're not scrambling in 5 different places looking for it. So that's kind of always been that kind of initial, put as much of that into one place, but make it as easy to use as possible. I'd always use the analogy, the grumpy supervisor who's in a hurry, who legally is the person who should be checking this. Traditionally, you won't get that type of person normally rooting through folders in the office or looking through spreadsheets. So there's we also built our solution for that type of user, because they're the person who needs information. Things like permits, yeah, we completely do that. We can obviously customize depending on the specific workflow, but usually a permit workflow is pretty straightforward. Somebody requests a permit, it's got a structured template that's preset, and there's a series of approvals, and you can't complete the work. So yeah, we've found that really good, because ultimately it's a core safety workflow that it makes a lot of sense to tie that in with the other safety elements. Like we find as we've been in the market and building the product, a lot of the customers, the product roadmap evolves based on what the user's feedback comes. So, like if somebody's using it for one thing, it's, oh, well, it'd be handy if it kind of naturally evolves, driven by what's in people's hands, not so much what people ask for in a sales demo. It's more when they're actually using it, and they're the ones, well, geez, it'd be handy if it did this or that, the other. So we kind of keep the focus on that as much as possible, because, if you can focus on the frontline user, they're the ones who, if you can get using it, where you as a company get a lot more value. So that's kind of always been the philosophy we've tried to stick with, like just to, keep it grounded around that as much as possible.
For plant and equipment, is it barcodes, or is it a tagging thing, or?
Well, you can do a QR code, so you can apply a QR code, put it on a machine. You can then scan the QR code, do an inspection, like the weekly GA2, for example, and it'll show you whether it's done or not, and you need to do it. So you can, which can be very useful, because one of the key goals, of course, is to, if there's a piece of machinery there, you want the fastest way to check, is it compliant? We actually find just something as simple as a numbering system almost works better, because if you've got a crane that's got crane number 237, you just type in 237, it'll pop up. You don't need to go to the crane and stop them and scan it, but you can as well. So, we find just a simple numbering system, that's a faster way to check. So you're not actually having to stop the machine operator as such, but we can do both. I know probably around time, I suppose after COVID, everyone cures codes for everyone's, and there's some really good applications. But we find the bigger machinery probably, and a simple numbering system, a bit old fashioned, but nice and simple. Just type in search, the number, press search, and it'll pop up. Is quite effective too, like, you know. So,
Yeah, I must say I've got experience with that. What we found with the numbering system is that if you had 3 or 4 different suppliers,
yeah,
we found the QRF code was very effective, because what it basically meant is that you've got an administrator in an office uploading various certs. So there was no site interface whatsoever. You just scanned it, and there was everything you needed to see was there.
yeah, exactly. And you don't need to navigate around. So there's a huge advantage.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
pops up and with traffic light system. So if the cert's expired, it goes red.
Yeah.
So you straight away, you just want to, there's no red, we're good. Amber if it's expiring soon, and green for good. So, you know, you kind of want to make it as visual, and the less amount of buttons the user's got to press, the better, frankly. You know, as you know, busy building site, you don't want somebody going and navigating through the various fields. It doesn't really work. So yeah, absolutely.
No, it's good from that viewpoint as well, as you said with the amber, that if it's expiring in a week, you've got a warning that you're not looking at the fine print to see, is it in date or is it out of date?
Absolutely, yeah. So you want to make it, frankly, as easy as possible for that. And like, it's funny, I spent a bit of time in New York last year in particular, and you know, first time I was there and trying to navigate around underground, the subway in New York is pretty complicated. The E line and West line, trying to go, Jesus, I'm confused. Eventually people just go colors, just go red line north, blue line east, etc. visually, because we're humans, frankly, are only the last couple of 100 years really been processing text. So whereas people process colors a lot better, like you'll navigate a lot better just visually using colors or shapes than you will necessarily with text as such. So yeah, very good.
Padraig, in terms of barriers to implementation, you mentioned there in your talk about replacing, I suppose, human interaction with AI for mundane tasks. Is there any, I suppose, tangible benefits? I mean, construction is slow to kind of reform, but are you able to prove that such and such an app or software will release this person or individual for 4 hours? And obviously there's a value, like, so how tangible are
yeah. So it's been a thing. We some of our customers will I wouldn't say eliminate's the wrong word, but relocated an admin resource to better tasks, where traditionally when they're collecting this information from subcontractors that have designated as admin people who would receive emails, put the emails into folders, and update it manually in spreadsheets. So our system cuts all that out. So there's quite an advantage, both in terms of, okay, you don't need that admin person now. But we find that's one aspect. The bigger aspect is the live interface with the data. So you can, at a click of a button, see who's on site. If you've got a contractor under critical path, to have enough people on site, they've only got 10 on site, they should have 15. That's a click away in a couple of seconds, rather than finding out at the weekly meeting, you know, such and such only had 10 people on site, they should have had 20. So we find there's a good value to the data and having the data really accessible. And of course, the other thing is making it really easy to make sure nothing expires by accident. So there's a big red number that pops up in the main interface that click the button to tell you if something's expired. So it sticks out like a sore thumb. So as much as possible, cutting out that admin effort. You know, people, contractors in particular, people are, every company's busy, certainly in the industry. They want, there's no one twiddling their thumbs, so they're more than happy to cut out that sort of task. But equally, we find giving them access to useful data fast. And in particular, time and attendance data can be really useful, not just from a compliance perspective, but a project management perspective, that you actually know you've got the right people on site in the right numbers to do the job. Like, so yeah.
In relation to safety file information, just about getting the most up-to-date version of drawings and things like that. Do you manage that kind of side of the house as well, or is it?
Well, you can put drawings in there, not so much. Like we more, and we know there's other solutions, some platforms out there who the drawing management, and it's not really been a focus. Our system allows you to put up drawings, issue approval for approval, but I wouldn't say it's our core functionality. We know there's frankly other systems out there that do it probably better than we do, and we keep as much as possible more on the workforce management side of things, the safety side of things, and which is usually kind of frankly, it's a critical workflow because, you know, something goes wrong, of course, it's a disaster, you know, there's legal implications. But usually it's at the point in, it's at the front line where this information has to be collected at a site level. We find typically the design management is more at a higher level. So we've kind of built our app very much around the front line, that it's those workflows that, you know, you need to make sure people have the right training. You got to collect your weekly inspections, you got to check the XYZ, you know, and that's kind of, well, certainly keeping us busy. We won't say never other features, but that side of things has been keeping us busy, and it's been the main focus, you know, to date, like, you know.
And does your software deal with the onboarding, such as induction or what have you, online induction?
Yeah, so you can essentially issue the induction, person can receive a link, complete it, it attaches to the profile, so when the person shows up, you can see straight away they've been inducted, they haven't. And you can see they've got their safe pass, you've got their manual handling, you can, then that links into, you can set minimum training, for example, that if they don't have it, they're blocked from getting onto site once it ties into the turnstile. So just simplifies that workflow, both in terms of the information being gathered, but equally reduces the chances of somebody being on site with the wrong documents as much as possible. So, you know, kind of the physical, again, I'd say principle of the first principle idea that, okay, what job needs to be done? You need to get somebody on site through an approvals process, making that as simple as possible, that it cuts out the administrative back and forth, but equally cuts out the risk of, frankly, you know, somebody missing something, or you forgot to safe pass or haven't been inducted. So you know, that's kind of a type of workflows we spend a lot of time on. Yeah.
And just with regard to data protection, then how do you address that?
Yeah, so like basically from a security perspective, we're SOC 2 Type 2, which is kind of the highest. When we entered the US market over last year, that was a lot of bigger clients. It's pretty much a standard over there. You have to be. You won't get in with the big customers over there without it. So we spend a lot of time on that. So which frankly, when you get into that, it's scary when you can see what you could be vulnerable if you didn't do it. So you got part of the process, you got to pay hackers to help break your app. So what they call penetration testing. And you see what these guys do, you go, Jesus, right? He wouldn't do. So it's scary. So you think the interesting skill set, but it's part of the whole process. And so any company in software not doing that is crazy, like, because you know you wouldn't sleep at night. So we spend a lot of time on the security side of things. But I think from a GDPR perspective, like the principle is typically information we're gathering is stuff that the client needs to gather legally, because they need to verify the training information. Typically, to gather any sort of private information, you have to have a legal basis to do it, which is certainly covered from a safety perspective. You've also got an obligation with the security side. So they're pretty much the two main GDPR requirements, which were, if we were gathering their credit card information or stuff like that, we might have an issue.
And the facial recognition, that's
yeah, again, same principle too, that the legal basis to collect it is valid. And you know, it's also, so it's like some say, oh well, I don't want people capturing my face, but you know, if you walk down the street, people have but I think there's from a GDPR perspective, you as an employer have a legal right to collect it. Now it can be some people don't handle it, they might have it in the terms and conditions of a contract, that as part of their onboarding process, you will be required to do that, which is probably sensible to include. But from a practical perspective, I think it's getting more and more accepted. Like, so I certainly, even 5 or 6 years ago in Australia, when we were putting in even cameras on site, like we had big problems, like even just that was a big no-no, and now it's becoming more and more the norm.
More accepted.
It is, and I suppose, well, the cameras is more progress tracking as much as anything. I think ultimately, just if you've got a valid safety reason to collect information, I think you know you're pretty well covered, and well, you can. I think there hasn't really been, how should we say, any problem beyond that. Now, one thing I would say is a lot of the major facial recognition manufacturers are owned by the Chinese government. So we deliberately steered away from them for which reason. So you can see issues, and actually funny enough in the US, that particular technology from a couple of those companies is actually banned.
Yeah.
Because for obvious reasons, you got to wonder why they're so curious in terms of facial recognition. But that's another issue, a separate issue, I guess. But but we find in the other thing too. I know we did consider looking at fingerprint type solutions.
Yeah.
Which problematic on the building side, dirty hands,
Yeah.
they don't perform as well. But also you're collecting more sensitive data. So if someone's fingerprints is a higher level of information than maybe their face, so which we thought there's no benefit. So we steered away from that as well too.
Yeah, I was actually involved in the early stages of fingerprinting, and again, it was we found it, first of all, as you say, that the physical side of it, the quality of the fingerprint, but also that it left itself wide open to risk of misuse, shall we say. You know, it's a different technology.
It doesn't perform as well from a practical perspective, definitely not. So definitely we find the level with facial recognition at the moment is great. Like it's certainly it's come on leaps and bounds. Like especially with the new machine learning that's behind it, that it just works, which is great. Like it was like even we have things like anti-spoofing, where again ties into machine learning capability, where a couple of years ago you could put a photo up to a camera of yourself and it'll recognize, it would recognize you'll get through the gate.
Yeah.
Now it's essentially it's what's called anti-spoofing algorithms, which are essentially machine learning algorithms, which has to be three-dimensional. They've got ways of getting around that. So there's less and less how should we say options to get around it, and people will still be creative, but less and less. Yeah.
We have one more question. So, the last question there. So, have you any experience using AI for compilation of vendor documentations for use by the contractor on site?
Sorry, which one, sorry?
Vendor documentation.
When you say vendor documentations, like does in particular any ones in particular?
Just subcontractor documentation.
Oh, sorry, like capturing insurance certs and stuff like that, or safety statements and.
Possibly, yeah.
Oh yeah, so our system essentially you can log the subcontractors can upload them. They can be approved through our system. We don't necessarily use AI as much as just a simple data capturing functionalities. I wouldn't say we've got AI within that workflow. It's essentially a document folder that a user can see if they've got they can search and see has a document uploaded, who's approved it. They can actually be issued digitally as well, but wouldn't necessarily be the AI side of things.
It's similar to the training records, if there's.
Yeah, so the more like we will look at, so for example, in insurance search, we're looking at applying the OCR to pulling the expiry date out on the insurance search.
Oh, yeah.
So if you think of an insurance search, you upload it. Important data is when's the renewal. So we're looking at AI that'll pull it up, populate it automatically, very similar to insurance, because that's the only thing that matters is the insurance in date or not. It's like a training, is it in date or not? So that's a use case we'd see quite useful. Things like method statements and RAMs, that sort of stuff, we've as much as possible steered away from any content creation, because you could talk to train safety managers who'll spend all day talking about the contents of a method statement, and it's one of those items we think that is going to be, okay, the AI can draft information that'll help them. You can use generative AI to help produce a draft, but to a large extent, it still requires that human expertise and collaborative approach as such. So yeah.
Very good.
Super.
Thanks a minute.
No, thank you very much.